that we are living in a time of massive social change in Ireland. I think the recent referendum did give everybody a shot in the arm. It very clearly signals that this myth that there is this somewhat conservative Irish majority out there that's keeping us all in line is simply not true. That Irish society has changed massively. There is a move for tolerance and openness, and we need to now build on that. And it is the case that probably one of the key areas that's left to resolve is the basic human right and women's right to health in terms of access to safe abortion facilities in Ireland. And I think the reason why we haven't got that is because of our constitutional provision. And I think what the meeting should discuss is in many ways very practical steps as to what people can do to change that. But I want to maybe step back a little bit from that, and when we talk about repealing the 8th Amendment and addressing the Constitution, and maybe I'll hear about what is the 8th Amendment and where did it come from. And I think we have to look back at what Ireland was many years ago, and the backdrop to the 8th Amendment really came out of the massive movement for change, for women's rights, for contraception, women in the workplace in the 1970s, when huge progress was being made out of the struggles by ordinary people. And at that time, abortion was already illegal in Ireland. It was, could be done for life, penal servitude for life, if you had an abortion or helped somebody to procure one, under the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861. So abortion was already illegal. But changes have been happening in America. The American Supreme Court brought out its famous judgment, Roe versus Wade, which relied on privacy in the family to say, no, you have to allow this. Elements in Irish society, and the Catholic hierarchy in particular, were concerned that the courts in Ireland might do something similar. So they said, we're going to have to get something in to be sure that we never have abortion in Ireland. And that was really the backdrop to the campaign, the pro-life amendment campaign, as it was called, and the drive to have something put into our constitution which they said would outlaw abortion and ensure there was no abortion in Ireland. And I think our starting point has to be that all that did was ensure that Irish abortions happened somewhere else. It didn't make a blind bit of difference to the choices that people had to make, except possibly the most vulnerable people who couldn't access money, who were of precarious immigration status, who couldn't leave the country, who didn't know where to go, the most vulnerable people, the youngest people, and so on. And since the 8th Amendment, there's been 160,000 Irish women have been expelled from this country to seek really medical care that is a routine part of women's reproductive lives in every society, including Ireland. But rather than providing it here, people are stigmatised, they're sent out of the country, and we would say that it's very much part of the same unbroken thread that gave us the hiding women behind Magdalene laundries, the horror of symphysiotomy, and so on. This is just the same thing. It's replacing that with access to pills on an internet or a Ryanair ticket. Leave the country, we don't want to know about it. So very much what we call an Irish solution or an English solution to what they called an Irish problem. And I think it is important to say that were it not for the proximity of England, then there would have been far more tragedies and losses of lives of women than even there has been already, and we should recognise that. Now, the 8th Amendment itself says, just for the record, the state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn, and with due regard to the equal right to life of the mother, guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as is practicable, by its laws to defend and vindicate that right. I mean, it's just utter nonsense, really, what it's doing. It's trying to equate a fetus with that of a fully grown woman, and then have this artificial balancing act between the two, which never was going to make sense. At the time they pointed out it was against human rights, it was going to cause all sorts of problems for Irish society, but they put it in any case. It was passed by 53%, or with 53% of those eligible to vote voting, and a 2-to-1 majority. So not really many, and obviously we'd have to start off by saying that nobody of present reproductive age had any say in that process, and yet the politicians tell us now the Irish people have spoken on this. Well, you know, they haven't. They say we don't need to rush this. This was brought in, 40 years ago, and they talk about rush. It's quite incredible because it has actually led to a huge problem. It's led to, initially, obviously, I suppose one of the most controversial cases was the X case, when a 14-year-old rape victim was essentially interned here, or they tried to intern her and stop her travelling to England with her parents for an abortion. That gave rise to the Supreme Court ruling, which said, well, do you know what, actually you can have abortion in Ireland, but only if a woman's life is in danger, including a risk of suicide. And out of that, we have again Irish hypocrisy enshrined in our constitution, where they came up with a referendum giving people the right to travel, the right to abortion information, so a constitutional right to abortion, just not here. Just go away. We don't want to know where you get it, how you get it. Just get out and have it somewhere else. Deal with your own problems yourself. So that's really the backdrop to that. I mean, again, as I would say, abortion is a normal part of people's reproductive lives. Obviously, women can get pregnant from their early teens, sometimes into their 50s. That's a huge amount of time to deal with, and people are often, in the course of their reproductive life, faced with choices, none of them easy, all of them valid. I'm not going to go into what they call the hard cases, the horrific cases that have made this issue real for people. The likes of Sth Halpen, who lost her life because the doctors were trying to artificially find out when her health problems would become life-threatening so that they could intervene, and of course by the time they did, it was too late. The horror of people who've been, like the Miss Wyatt, as they called that case, the young rape victim who came to Ireland seeking refuge, having been repeatedly violated in her home country, come here, find she's pregnant, and a new horror opens up where, despite her constant pleas with poor language, with no access to money or resources really to leave the country, to try and ask to have that pregnancy terminated, and then being forced by cesarean section later on, it was just beyond horror. And all of these cases, but I'm not even going to deal with that. I'm not going to deal with the issues of the parents and their couples who come and highlighted the devastating situation they've been put into when they find that a much wanted pregnancy has been diagnosed with a fatal abnormality. And it's not like what people were saying on the news on the so-called Life Rally. I saw a woman being interviewed with her Down syndrome child and saying, oh, these people want to kill Down syndrome's babies, which was, all of those people that we've met, if they had been told that the fetus had a Down syndrome condition, they would have been absolutely delighted compared to the diagnosis that they got, that the fetus had malformed and was never going to be born alive or only live for a few seconds. It's an entirely different thing. But I think those issues maybe are slightly to the side, because my point would be it doesn't really matter what the circumstances are. An issue of a woman's health, what she decides to do, it really should be a matter for her and her doctor. And there shouldn't be all the other complexities of the side clouding that judgment and making it difficult. Now, obviously, Ireland has been centre stage in terms of condemnation by human rights bodies. The UN Human Rights Committee said Ireland are in conflict with Articles 2, 3, 6, 7, 17, 19, 26. We've had people say that the Irish state treats women as a vessel, that once you're a woman and you're pregnant, you lose all control over your body or decisions that you can make about your own health. Alan Shatter himself said that even our constitution means that if someone's health is impacted, even if it means permanent incapacity, under our constitution there can't be a medical intervention there. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And the only way in which we can address that is by removing the 8th Amendment, taking that provision out of the constitution in order for us to legislate for the circumstances where people need abortion. And I think Amnesty, you would have seen their report done recently, not only that, but the bill that the government brought in, which was supposed to help the situation, the so-called Protection of Life During Pregnancy Bill, which was to deal with the X case ruling, has actually made, in many ways, the situation worse. And it too has to go. It continues to criminalise women and their doctors, albeit the penal servitude for life has been replaced by 14 years. That is just in breach of all human rights standards. And they would say, and Amnesty aren't known for being hugely radical, but to meet the most minimum human rights standards, then Ireland needs to bring in legislation to deal with circumstances of where a woman is impregnated by rape, incest, in cases of fatal fetal abnormalities, and in cases where the woman's health is in danger. As an absolute, to meet the minimum human rights standards in this regard. So I think there's been a huge change. In some ways we would say everything's different, but it remains the same. In legislative terms, the difficulties are still there, but in terms of the attitudes and the hearts and minds of citizens, it's dramatically pushed forward. And I'll leave Ailbhe deal with a lot of the campaigning aspects of this and how we can tap into that. But all of the opinion polls repeatedly show that a majority of Irish people want this issue addressed, with a sizable minority supporting a woman's right to choose in all circumstances. And so I think, there's a huge body there. I think all of the political parties have been forced to look at this because of the amount of debate that's been had over the lifetime of this Dáil, with many of them shifting, and now I'm calling openly for appeal. We have a general election hopefully before Christmas, but maybe not at the latest in February. But in any case, it's getting near, and I think there is a real opportunity to say to the party, this must be part of the next programme for government. So there's a huge amount that can be done. The Repeal the 8th Amendment campaign has brought in a broad umbrella, student groups, trade union groups, community groups, loads of different people on this, a cross-section of NGOs, and there is a role for people in communities, for people for profit or whatever, to join a local group here to elevate and push these issues, because it's summertime, all the politicians care about is getting re-elected generally, and they need to hear it, that this is a huge issue for women and for Irish society. And I think if people do that and make a run with that, I think it can be a big motive force for change. Look, I'm not going to say a lot more. Abortion is a fact of Irish life. It's just crass hypocrisy that it doesn't happen in Ireland. It's just almost beyond belief. And the women who have abortions are the women who have children. Every family has women who've had abortions. It's a very natural part of people's reproductive experience. It's far better if people have access to make that decision early on in the pregnancy, particularly now with the advance of medicine and abortion pills taken safe. They shouldn't have to buy them illegally over the internet, faced with possible criminalisation and so on. It's a relatively straightforward procedure early on. We shouldn't be complicating this at all. So look, I think we have a lot to play for. It's a privilege really for all of us to be living at a time when we can play a role in making society better. And really all we're looking for is the right for 50% of our people to be allowed to have access to control their own bodies and decisions about their own health. Is it really that radical? I don't think so, and it's all to play for. So I really would encourage people to get involved with a local group that hopefully will get kicked off tonight.
Thanks a million, Claire, and thanks for bringing the city of Dublin to come out to us. Now, for those of you, the next speaker is Ailbhe Smyth from Repeal the chairman of the Repeal the 8th Coalition. So I'll just give out the flyer. Show the Twitter account.
Well, hello everybody, and thanks very much to Melissa and people who have brought it out here in Dunleary for organising the meeting this evening. And it's really great to get an opportunity at this time to talk with people who I think that we are actually interested in doing something on the ground here. So, as instructed by Deputy Daly, I'll do the nuts and bolts bit, okay? Because actually Claire has spoken really very eloquently and I think very comprehensively about why we need to do this. And I was actually thinking to myself as I was coming over this evening, as I do so often, I think back to 1983, I think back to myself in 1979, when the first when a very fledgling Women's Right to Choose group formed here in Dublin, and a member of the group actually rang me to say, we're doing this, what do you think? And I said, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And within about 3 seconds almost of that phone call, at least in sort of 3 political seconds, that we were hearing that there was going to be this absolutely massive referendum taken to quell this revolt and this rebellion on the part of millions and billions of women who are out there going to be having abortions every single day all over the place, all over the time, and wrecking the entire country. So it was a hugely disproportionate response at the time to me what was in the first instance, a discussion group trying to move things along in a way that would, I think, ultimately have been far more productive than what happened. And we were bounced and forced into a referendum which was an absolute disgrace, and which people at the time said was a disgrace. And indeed, Claire, you were there the other day when Ailbhe Smyth actually said during the presentation to members of the Dáil on the coalition, Cllr, who is not someone like necessarily holding a big candle for normally, but he said, I was the only TD in the Dáil at the time who decided that referendum, the wording of that referendum, because, and he said this subsequently before this as well, because quite simply it's discriminatory. It actually discriminates against people. Now, there was a huge amount of talk and discussion and attempts on the part of the women's movement and a much broader anti-amendment group to actually push that back. But of course, once the government had decided that this is what they were going to do, in cahoots with the Catholic Church, that is exactly what they went ahead and did. And it has caused trouble, it has caused immense distress for women in all those 32 years. And that's the part I think about all the time. That for the past 32 years, so many women, not just the 160,000 minimum women who have had to travel abroad for an abortion, but all of the women who went through in their heads were in a situation where they were saying to themselves, gosh, I'm just not sure, I don't even want to have this baby, or I don't want to have a baby at all, or I don't want to have this baby now, or I have 3 other babies and I certainly can't. But, whatever was going through a woman's head, that there was nowhere really that she could go in safety. A few places in Dublin, the IFTA and Wellwood and a few other places. But basically, out around the country, who could she talk to about that? It was the most, and it still is in many ways, the most deeply stigmatized procedure that you could think of as a woman. And so much so that the word abortion, as many of you will know, was not a word that was used. And thank goodness, over the past few years, I think it was really the movement around the X case and getting legislation, thanks to people like Clare, that we began to use that word abortion a bit more freely. But when you couldn't even use the word abortion, how on earth were you going to talk to people about the problem, the dilemma, the need, the wish, the desire that you had in your head as a woman, to at least talk with somebody about whether or not you should go ahead with pregnancy, and if you weren't, what you would do, instead of having to go into a kind of under-the-table, secretive, hidey-hole sort of process and try and find the money. Now, that's not nuts and bolts. I didn't even start off on that, but so sorry about that. But what I'm saying is that distress, that history of distress is there. And I think about the 160,000 women who did go, and who, in that sense, were fortunate at least to be able to go and get the abortion. But I think of all those women who never got to go away. And we will never know how many of them there were. And they will never tell us, because the vast majority of those women have children. And they're very proud of those children. And they love them dearly. And they look after them. And they have now put out of their heads, maybe, the fact that at that time they thought about having an abortion, but weren't able to go and do it. But there are still layers and layers of repression, layers of denial, layers of just sheer cruelty, actually, to women right across the years. And if ever anybody says, but why would you be wanting to do this now? That is simply the answer. There has been too much distress, too much repression, too much hurt, too much denial, too much downright lying. There is actually a real abortion rate in this country, minimum of 4.5 to 5%. And that is simply based on the numbers of women we know leave this country to get an abortion abroad and to give Irish addresses. But that doesn't include women who would have been getting the abortion pill, who may have gone to other countries, like the Netherlands, the small number of women who do that, or indeed who give UK addresses, cousins and aunties, and whoever not friends in the UK when they go to have an abortion. So we actually have an abortion rate which is very real and which corresponds to what women need and what women want in their lives. So closing our eyes to this and saying that we don't have abortion now, we're saying it's completely ridiculous, but it is also actually a downright lie. The fact that it doesn't take place on the actual territory of this island is simply putting a whole load of angels to dance on the top of a pin. It is just a sleight of hand. It is deeply dishonest, and we have to stop that. So we know that there are very good reasons why we need to get rid of this amendment. But people have often said to us in the coalition, well, why are you not actually called the Coalition for Free, Safe, Legal Abortion, which is what very many members of the coalition are actually in favour of? Well, because what we need to do first at the moment is, just as many of us fought for the SK legislation, not because we thought that was going to be great legislation, and dear God, it's dreadful legislation actually, and it was originally called Protection of Women During Pregnancy legislation, and it got called, then women were just taken out of the equation entirely, and life was put in. Why not just protect women? Just protect women during pregnancy will be absolutely fine. It's this universal aim of protecting life. Actually, let's just start with where it's at and make sure that women are all right and safe and respected and protected and their health looked after. But so we said that we would set up the coalition to repeal the 8th because we can do nothing more until that is gone. And we're very, very clear in the coalition, as I expect many of you, if not all of you, would be too. We don't want to replace it with anything else. Women's health and women's maternal health and women's pregnant health have actually no place in the Constitution. And the Constitution should not be required to carry this issue. It's an extraordinary thing that we have it in our Constitution. There are other countries with very draconian abortion legislation, large countries like Malta and Andorra and places like that, but it's not in their Constitution. But we have it in our Constitution so that it can't be got out, so to speak. Well, we're here to say, yes, it can be got out, and we're going to get it out. And after 32 years, I am so determined that we are getting this out, because I look at my daughter, who is a mere infant in 1983 when the amendment was passed, and I think, dear God. And then now I look at my granddaughter. I was in the happy position of having a granddaughter, I'm very thrilled about it, but I think, I don't believe this, that, there's a mother, a daughter, a granddaughter, generations of women who are carrying this terrible burden, really, and it's a burden when it becomes your problem. It is a burden when it's something that you need and you want in your life, and you can't access it as a normal need. So that's why we're, so to speak, fixing ourselves on we're targeting repeal and getting rid of that. But that's not to say that we think that things will all be resolved then. Of course not. We do have to look at what happens after repeal. So in the coalition we are giving some thought and setting up actually a working group, which we just decided the other day, to look at what options there are. What do other countries do? So to do some comparative work on abortion legislation elsewhere, and even to look at Canada, which doesn't have a law at all, which simply regulates abortion through medical services, which is actually what I think should happen. Like you have your appendix out, and there isn't a law about appendicitis and the extraction of the appendix, or the removal of varicose veins, or other elective surgeries. There is no, you don't have the Doyle sitting there. I mean, you'd be driven crazy if for every single surgical procedure you had a piece of legislation. So I do think that it's really important for us to say, to ask ourselves, what is that about? What is that about, that there has to be a special law, and not only in Ireland, but that it is considered necessary to have laws that control women's fertility and women's childbirth. And that is, of course, exactly why there is a law. It is precisely about control. It is precisely about a patriarchal system, if you like, or a male-dominated system, whatever you want to call it. Couldn't be bothered arguing about the language. But it's certainly not a bunch of women who stood up there and said, we will have mass national control of pregnancy and conception and birth and so on, not at all. It is a historical control mechanism for controlling what women do with our bodies. And I think, therefore, there is an extremely good argument for at least having us raise our voices and ask the question, why do we have to have a law? Having said that, I'm a realist, and I know perfectly well that actually in Ireland there's no way we're going to have a Canadian situation to be able to regulate it through legislation. But that's what we should be aiming for in, the time of my great-granddaughter, probably. But that we need to be aiming for that. And we also need to be constantly asking ourselves that question. So that's what we're doing. When? People then say, well, when do you want this repealed? Well, of course, yesterday, 32 years ago, we never wanted it to happen. But we did start putting the coalition together immediately after the Protection of Life during Pregnancy Act was passed in July 2013, because it seemed to us that, that was there and people were going to sit back and say, well, there's nothing more we can do now for the moment. But that's actually the moment when you need to say, sorry, job not done, far from it, it's going to be more trouble, actually, and it has caused more trouble. So we need to get up on side immediately and start gathering the forces that are going to be needed to win this referendum. And particularly, at the moment, putting a lot of emphasis on the coalition, precisely because, as Claire said, there's been, such a tremendous victory in the Yes Equality, Marriage Equality Referendum. And that has been absolutely fantastic. And there is so much that we can learn from that campaign. And I see Barrett here is involved as well, and many of the people here, that, we know that. At the same time, we know that this is a very different issue. And we know that it will not be as easy to raise money for abortion and the right to abortion, which is effectively what Repeal the Eighth Amendment is about. As it was difficult to raise money for marriage equality, it will be twice as difficult to raise it for abortion. It was difficult, despite the great victory. There was a lot of hard work over 9-10 years of organisations working together that went into producing that referendum result. But I think people forget that. They think, oh, it's not amazing in 2 months. Ireland around. Marriage Equality was formed 9 years ago. Glenn, roughly about the same time, if not sooner. The Irish Council for Civil Liberties working for a long time in this country on human rights. So it did seem to us a couple of years ago that we needed to get a really strong coalition with the student groups, as you were saying, Claire, with political organisations and groups like People Before Profit and others, with trade unions. There's a very strong trade unionist for repeal, with the human rights groups, and I'm very pleased to say that the Irish Council for Civil Liberties is hugely supportive of the work the coalition does, with the National Women's Council, with all of the pro-choice groups and so on. And there are now about 30 organisations. And actually I feel really proud of that, because each one of those organisations was asked and stood up and said yes and came forward. So we feel that we would love there to be a referendum in the lifetime of this government, before November or hopefully February. But is that going to happen? Let's be absolutely realistic, and we can call for it, but it's 99.999 recurring percent unlikely that this will happen by November, which is no surprise, I'm sure, to anybody here. But we don't want the grass to grow under the feet of any government. We want it in the programmes for government of all of the political parties. And we want that to happen. I'll say one word about that in a minute. And we want it to be targeted specifically as a referendum. Really, if you like, the first referendum that a new government will have to undertake. I know that there are many pressing issues in this country, and it is not in any way to exclude them, but constitutionally, just talking in terms of the constitutional change that needs to take place, this is the one that absolutely can't wait any longer. Women simply can't wait. We have been waiting forever. That's it. It's enough. We're on the move now, and it's going to change. So we'll be asking very strongly for an immediate referendum, so to speak. We're trying to talk with the parties to get them to put it into their programmes for government. The Labour Party actually has it in their government. Of course, people for profit has. Of course, the Anti-Austerity Alliance has. Of course, the Socialist Party has. Of course, smaller parties, because we're on the left and because we are up for women and because we actually believe in genuine equality, that this has been part of our programme for a long time. Sinn Féin, I hope, will have it in their manifesto. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but there have been some people in Sinn Féin saying yes it will, others have been saying one in particular over by dead body, so take your pick. Fianna Fáil have said they're not going to say anything at all about it. I won't comment. Simply will not comment. Fine Gael, as usual, simply don't know what to do. They're absolutely waiting to see what way everybody else will jump. But between now and November, or now and February, hopefully we'll be able to put enough more pressure on people. I think that how we need to organise is obviously very, very key. And there is that lobbying which is going on, and we are a bit in and out of the Dáil. Did a presentation the other day, it was reasonably well attended. We'll be in and out again. We are trying to build up a media profile, which takes a really long time. We had a press conference the other day with somebody we came to, but nothing really ended up in the paper or on TV. So it's an awfully slow process, as we know, but we're actually doing that and working with people in communications and so on. But to do all of these things, of course, we have to raise money. So we're also trying to fundraise and look programmes and donations, principally abroad at the moment. But again, that's a very difficult thing. But we are also working with organisations who themselves take action, like the Abortion Rights Campaign, our Action for Choice, our People Before Profit, our USI. And our job in the coalition is to try to hold that and be a platform and connect all of the different things that are happening. So as part of that, we're having a conference. We had a conference last September. We're going to have another one on the 12th of September this year in the Gresham Hotel. And there will be lots of speakers, but also discussion groups on organising, discussion groups on social media, discussion groups on medical abortion, lots of discussion opportunities. So I don't have the flyer for that yet, but you can go to our Facebook page, Coalition European Based Amendment, and you'll see the details coming up. And we are also contributing to building for the March for Choice at the end of September. In the meantime, we're really trying very hard to recruit more organisations. There's a target of 50 organisations by November, December, and I'm pretty confident that we'll actually reach that, because I think if the coalition finish up, we should finish up 5 minutes ago. I think she's very patient. But just to say that I think we will actually get there. But our next step really is the local groups. And it would be absolutely fantastic to see if we're setting up here. And then, because the coalition is formed of member groups and organisations, you can join the coalition. You just be part of the coalition. And you can give those money that you want. And we could talk about it. So, I'm sorry if I went on a bit at the beginning, but it still makes me so angry. It really does. And I still feel that. And I think it's very important to persuade people in this country that we really need to make that second change. Having taken one big step, we can now take a second, and it's not so hard. Thank you all very much.